Welcome to New York Got Game.
We are back with another edition of New York Got Game, and you get an episode a couple of days earlier this week, well, because of free agency. That starts on Sunday evening, June 30th, but before we get to that, what a week it has been in New York basketball. For the first time since 1983, we saw a deal between the Knicks and the Nets. That never happens, basically, and it was a major one. The Knicks, they acquired Mikal Bridges for Bojan Bogdanovic and a haul of picks. We're going to get into all of that. We're going to preview free agency for both of the local teams. And we've got two guests on today's show to break it all down. So let's get right into it.
The Knicks are heating up.
Okay, so the Knicks appear to have gone all in with their acquisition of Mikal Bridges, and they're bringing back OG Anunoby on a new deal. But where does this leave the Knickerbockers in terms of other moves they can or cannot make in free agency and throughout this offseason? Let's preview free agency for the Knicks, and we're going to do that with New York Post Knicks beat reporter, the one and only Stefan Bondy, who joins me now. And Steph, I would ask how free agency has been going for you the offseason, but one, it's been busy, and two, it might basically already be over.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, they made a bunch of moves maneuvering on draft night. They have no cap space. And the big question now is what happens with Isaiah Hartenstein? And we're going to find out by tomorrow night. I think, well, I wouldn't say that we're going to find out definitively by tomorrow, but we're going to get a bigger picture of where this is going by tomorrow night.
Yeah, we should know that. That's why we want to preview this today, get right into it. And before we get to free agency, I want to go back with you and look at the draft. So the Knicks, they made two trades and took one of their selections in the first round of this year's draft. They used the 25th pick on 18-year-old French wing Pacome Dadier. The Knicks also made three selections in the second round: Tyler Colette, Kevin McCullough Jr., and Ariel Hukporti. How do you evaluate what the Knicks did at this year's draft?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they, in the second round, they got some guys that could potentially make the final roster, but you don't know. I mean, they could also be G League guys in the first round. They got a guy who's a project, obviously 18 years old only. And one of the interesting aspects of it is there was speculation right when the pick happened that they were going to send this guy overseas because, a draft and stash doesn't count against the cap, and it can help them re-sign Isaiah Hartenstein theoretically. But then he got to the podium and said, my plan is to stay here. At which point the Knicks would have to give him a rookie contract, and he starts, counting against the cap. So I think that's something interesting to monitor. Unlike any other teams, most teams make their executives available to the media or their first-round picks available to the media after, the day after the picks are done. The Knicks did not do that, so there's no further clarity on what's happening with him. But overall, I thought, they made a lot of picks, and we'll see where they are. The draft is always a crapshoot.
Draft is always a crapshoot indeed, and I know fans would like a little bit more clarity in terms of what is going on with Pacome Dadier. Will he stay? Will he be stashed or not? But unfortunately, because as you mentioned, the Knicks do not talk to the media, we have no idea. So we're all in the dark, just like the fans are. Now, before the draft, Steph, the team upgraded the Nova Knicks with a big trade that sent Bojan Bogdanovic 5 first-rounders, a pick swap, and a second-rounder to Brooklyn for Mikal Bridges. Did the Knicks give up too much for Bridges in your eyes, and do you like his fit on this roster right now?
I think they gave, it's certainly a lot, but I don't think it's too much because you had to do what had to get done to get Mikal Bridges. I think he's a perfect fit for the Knicks. Back in February, I wrote a story saying that they should go after the guy just because he makes so much sense with who the Knicks are for an inordinate amount of reasons. Including, you mentioned the Nova stuff. I mean, there's chemistry, there's friendship. That went a long way last season with the Knicks. Just, watching the team kind of come together, and he only adds to that. On top of that, he is the consummate number 3 guy that you want on the team. He wasn't a good number 1 when he was on Brooklyn. He couldn't carry the torch there, but in Phoenix, when he was the number 3, that was a championship contending team. And, guess what he's going to be in New York? He's going to be a number 3. So, they got a guy on a cheap contract. They didn't have to give up one player that was projected to be in their rotation. I guess Bogdanovic might have been in their rotation, but he certainly wasn't going to be a big piece of their rotation. And now if you look at the entire Knicks rotation right now, I mean, they're from 1 through 8. They're pretty incredible. I mean, you got coming off the bench, you're going to have Josh Hart, Dante DiVincenzo, and Miles McBride. That's a as good a trio off the bench as I can think of. Now, granted, we don't know the lineup yet. Whether Dante obviously started last year, and whether he's going to go to the bench for Mikal Bridges, we don't know that stuff yet. But I'm just projecting, looking at this lineup and seeing how deep it is and how they can, be just a tremendous rotation 1 through 8.
Yeah, looks strong right now with Bridges sliding right into that 1 through 8 rotation. So we'll see how all that plays out. And right before the draft, reports came up that OG Anunoby agreed on a 5-year, $212 million deal to return to the Knicks. What did you make of the deal for OG to be back in the fold here in New York?
I think it's similar to you got to do what you have to do to get it done, because there was no way the Knicks were going to let OG Anunoby leave. They gave up RJ Barrett and Emmanuel quickly for him. And, there was sticker shock immediately, because you see that contract and, before free agency started, the projections were 4 years, $160 million or $140 million. And then he ends up getting $213 million. You're like, wow. But then when you look across the NBA, this is now the going rate. Salaries have exploded. The NBA just signed a $7.6 billion, and I mean billion-dollar television media rights deal. So, this is where it's going. The Knicks have they signed a bunch of people before this free agency, so they got some good contracts, including Jalen Brunson, who's under a tremendous deal and eligible for an extension this summer. Julius Randle's on a good deal right now. Mikal Bridges is on a good deal right now. Dante DiVincenzo, Josh Hart. So, at some point you have to pay the going market rate, and that's what the Knicks did with OG Anunoby.
Yeah, and one other thing that should be noted as well, too, and you know this, the cap will eventually be going up. So 2-3 years into this, the number that OG is making is not going to count for as much against the cap. And so it won't be that bad. But you know this, people have the sticker shot. We do this every year in free agency, unfortunately. We see this every year, Steph. Everybody gets shocked at these numbers.
I had it, too. I said, whoa.
Yeah,
when I saw that
I get it, right?
So,
212 is a whole lot. I get it.
Yeah.
It's a lot. But you got to do what you got to do. I'm in agreement with you on that. So, Steph, now with the draft over and the deal that we saw happen with Mikal Bridges, we turn our attention to free agency, and there's been so much talk surrounding whether or not the Knicks can bring back Isaiah Hartenstein. With free agency starting Sunday, June 30th, 6 p.m., in your eyes, is it imperative that the Knicks bring back Hart, assuming that he wants to stay in New York? And what's a realistic way they can make that happen with the cap space that they really don't have available right now?
So imperative, I'll start with your first question. Imperative, I don't know the answer to that. I could go either way, because on one hand, if you look at the center situation, Mitchell Robinson was great when he played in the beginning of last year, and then he got hurt, like he often does. And so you question, hey, how much can I rely on Mitchell Robinson? And, Isaiah Hartenstein stepped in, and I thought he was an even better fit than Mitchell Robinson. And the way that he fit, when they had that death lineup, in January, Isaiah Hartenstein was a part of it when OG Anunoby and Julius Randle were both playing. And the Knicks looked like championship contenders for a month. That's when I really realized, hey, this guy, he's a starting center in the NBA. And, frankly, if you look at the free agent list, he's the top available center in free agency right now. Now, I mentioned the Mitchell Robinson aspect. Also, Tom Thibodeau has been great at developing centers who are, who nobody thought much of, who are underpaid and underappreciated and underdogs. He takes them and he gives them defined roles, and he elevates them to spots that nobody thought they'd go to. I mean, he did it with Nerlens Noel. He did it with Taj Gibson. He did it with Mitchell Robinson, and then he did it with Isaiah Hartenstein and even Precious Achiuwa. So you question, hey, can the Knicks just easily replace somebody like Isaiah Hartenstein by bringing in another guy like him who's undervalued and developing him in the Tibbs system? That's a possibility. But when you look at Isaiah, too, there's other aspects to his game that makes him unique. He's a tremendous passer. He's a great rebounder. He's tough. So I think the Knicks definitely want to retain him. I wouldn't call it a disaster if they don't. And it's going to be an uphill battle to bring back what I mentioned is the top center right now in the free agency market.
Yeah, it's going to be a challenge for the Knicks to do that. We'll see what happens. Like you said, not that we're going to definitively know by Sunday, June 30th, but we should have a little bit better idea of what direction that's going in.
And
So,
we could definitively know.
true.
I've been, you've seen it before. As soon as that deadline hits, it's just a stream of deals being completed. And Isaiah Hartenstein, who, by the way, has been legally allowed to negotiate with the
Right.
Knicks right now. So yeah, I could see something happening on tomorrow night, but at the deadline.
Yeah, we could see that. Remember, 6 p.m., June 30th. We'll see what happens, how it all goes down. Knicks fans anxiously awaiting to see what happens with iHeart. Steph, the not-so-fun part, at least now in my eyes, in talking about free agency this offseason with the Knicks and really all teams, is we got to do cap gymnastics now, right? As it stands, after trading for Mikal Bridges, the Knicks are capped out, as you mentioned, or hard capped at the $185.6 million first apron. They can't exceed, for folks that don't understand, they can't exceed that number unless they expand the Bridges trade to send an additional $4.3 million in outgoing salary. So, Steph, let's say the Knicks can't bring back iHeart. Who are some names they could target to fill out the rest of the roster and shore up the center position?
So they're, like you said, they're gonna have nothing to spend, so it's gonna have to be a cheap option. I've always liked Mason Plumlee. I covered him when he was at the Brooklyn Nets over a decade ago. I think he's a Tibbs guy. He plays hard as heck. He can pass. He's like a much older Isaiah Hartenstein in a lot of ways. So, he's a guy that I would target. I don't know necessarily, what the Knicks are looking at in terms of their backup options. Precious Achiuwa is also a restricted free agent, so they have to figure out what they're going to do with him. I mentioned Mitchell Robinson is already on the roster. So, I think a lot has to unfold before we understand like who's part plan B, C, and D, because we don't know the answers to plan A and B yet. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, completely understood. Still so much that is up in there. I do like Mason Plumlee as a name. I think we both were covering the Nets at that time. Mason Plumlee, good dude covering. He would fit right in, I think, into Tibbs' system. Last thing for me, Steph, let's assume, and this is probably likely, that there's no more major moves this offseason for the Knicks. Does this team have the core players that they want going forward? And where do you view this team in terms of being a title contender right now? Are they a contender for an NBA title this upcoming season?
Well, I mean, you got Boston. That's the big problem. I think the Knicks are clearly at this point number 2 in the East. And Boston was just freaking steamrolled the entire Eastern Conference. And then they bulldozed the Mavericks in the final. They have a complete and balanced roster and rotation. And they also have, an injury problem with Kristaps Porzingis, who's undergoing surgery. But, I mean, I think if you look at the road to and the path to the championship, it goes through Boston. And the Knicks, as a result of that, got 2 wings in OG Anunoby and Mikal Bridges now to compete with the Celtics, to guard Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. So I sure as heck hope we get a Celtics-Knicks conference finals next year. I think that would be freaking theater. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think they're better than the Celtics now, but I think they're more competitive against them, and they would give them a good series.
All right, I'm here for that. Let's sign up for that. Let's get a Celtics-Knicks conference finals. I think a lot of basketball fans would love to see that. That is Stefan Bondy, Knicks beat writer for the New York Post. Check out his work. Steph, I know it's about to get busy for you. You're going to be on your watch at 6 p.m. on Sunday, June 30th. And then, maybe you'll relax before Summer League, but we'll see. We'll talk to you soon. Man. Thank you, my friend. Appreciate it.
All right, buddy.
The Nets are heating up.
It appears as though the Brooklyn Nets have made a decision about their direction after trading Mikal Bridges to the Knicks, and now they're looking at an offseason where they also already reportedly re-signed center Nick Claxton. So let's talk about the Nets offseason with Nets beat writer for the New York Post. My friend Brian Lewis joins me now. Brian, how are you doing? How's the start to your Nets offseason going?
I'm doing well. I guess we can call this the offseason. It's heavy season, busy season.
Yeah, it's an off season for the team. It's not an off season for you because basketball never stops. We understand this. But here we are, still continuing to talk about the off season. All right, Brian. With the Bridges trade, it seemed like the Nets, as I mentioned just now at the top, like they finally picked a direction in terms of where they want to go as a franchise. Mm-hmm. With all the first-round picks that they have, which is 16 between now and 2031, that they acquired in the trade with the Knicks and also the trade from the Rockets. Is Brooklyn in full rebuild mode here?
That's subjective, right? Because, I mean, this is certainly far more of a rebuild than what they were doing, which was straddling the line, kind of half measures, trying to win and trying to build. So it's more of a rebuild than that. But some would contend that a full rebuild would include trading either Dorian Finney-Smith or Cam Johnson, or both. And the question is, do you want to use all of these expiring contracts or some of these expiring contracts? And they have many. You got Ben Simmons at $40 million. You got Bogey at close to 20. You got Dennis Schroeder, who's on a good contract, but $13 million. Do you want to use some or all of these in salary dumps to get back even more assets? And that's what Sean Marks did during his first rebuild. So the question is whether you want to do that again. And if you do that, then that pushes out how long this rebuild will take. It would be even deeper and longer if you do that. So that's the question.
Yep, that is a question. It'll be interesting to see how they move to that, and we'll get to some of the players that they can still move off of. We'll get to that in a little bit. But Brooklyn, we know that they will bring back center Nick Claxton. He'll be back on a 4-year, $100 million deal. Do you like this move to have Claxton, at least for the time being, as part of this Nets core going forward?
Yes, because he's young enough that he can still be here and be in his prime when the team is good again. So I do like that. And you also have to take into consideration the cap. The cap is going up. It may be, 155 million, and then go up to, 171 or thereabouts. So 25 million with the new cap, as they're flush with all this TV money, really equates to more like 16, 17, or maybe 18 a year ago.
Right, and that's the thing, because when you look at it, with, as you said, all the new money coming in and the cap going up, the percentage of the cap that Claxton's contract will be in a couple of years will obviously be a lot less. So it's really a pretty fair deal for him, and will be good money for him even in 2-3 years from now. So it'll be fine, and he's a good player to have as part of their core. Now, this is what you touched upon, Brian, a bit earlier, because it seems, and I stress the word there, seems like the Nets would be open for business to make some more moves. Do you think the team has interest this summer in moving on from two guys you mentioned, Dorian Finney-Smith and or Cam Johnson? They would seem to hold the most value, at least in trades, if you don't take the expiring contracts of Ben Simmons and also Bojan Bogdanovic. Do you think the team will look to move both or either of those guys?
I would be moderately surprised if they're not looking to move at least one of those two, because that's still a half rebuild, right? You can do that and not feel obligated to take on, tons of bad contracts. Now, in the case of Cam Johnson, I think that's where the higher ask will be. You look at his age, he's 28. You look at his height, he's 6'8", almost 6'9". You look at his shooting, he's going to hit 40% or thereabouts. I think the ask is higher on Cam. I think Dorian might be a more reasonable price. Also, when you consider that he can opt out, right? So he would play this year. He could opt out when you're still in full rebuild mode, which I think would be likely. So you'd lose him for nothing after a year. So I think if I had to put money on it, and I'm not a gambling man, but I would say moving Dorian seems more likely than moving Cam.
All right, that makes a lot of sense. With his contract, should be a little bit easier to move. We'll see if the Nets move off of either of those two guys. And Brian, we know next year, the 2025 offseason, not to get too far ahead, the Nets, they could have as much as $80 million in cap space to spend. What should the Nets' goal be here this summer in free agency, and what kind of players should they look to bring into Brooklyn as they try to your words, it's subjective here, is it a full rebuild? Is it a quasi-rebuild? So what kind of players should they be looking at in free agency depending on the direction that they're going in with a rebuild?
What kind of players should they be looking at for 2024?
For this summer. This summer, yep.
Well, I think that partly depends on your plan and how you're going to operate, right? So we mentioned as an example Dennis Schroeder, right? So you've got a point guard situation where you've got Ben Simmons, who, frankly, you can't trust his health. You've got Dennis Schroeder, who's only under contract for 1 year and has the feeling of a bridge or a stopgap or what have you, right? So if you opt to move Dennis Schroeder, you absolutely need a point guard. You may need a point guard who's under contract for multi-years anyway. But if you move Dennis, you absolutely need a point guard. So I would say offhand, somebody like Tyus Jones might make sense. Now, the problem is, Tyus Jones is coming off a 2-year, $29 million contract. So you would have to give him a multi-year deal with your mid-level exception to even consider getting him. But that's the kind of guy. You also need an adult in the room because eventually you're going to need to mentor some of the young guys. Who that adult will be, I don't know. I'm not saying it's Kevin Love. I'm saying you need an adult like a Garrett Temple, who you had here before. You will need a player like that to mentor some of the younger guys.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting. But you make a great point. It really depends on what the direction is. And we still kind of haven't seen that. We've seen that a little bit, but it depends on what direction they go in with some players they could move off of and what needs may come about here in free agency this year in 2024. But Brian, last thing for me, we're saying this and we kind of don't have clarity on it. It appears to be a full rebuild mode for the Nets. If that is the direction they are in, a full rebuild, not a quasi-rebuild, a full rebuild, how competitive, if competitive at all, do you expect this team to be during the 2024-2025 season? And do you believe the future is brighter for the Brooklyn Nets now than it was prior to the Bridges trade?
Well, when you say how competitive, I covered a 28-win season, a 21-win season, a 20-win season. It wouldn't shock me if this is worse than all of those. That wouldn't shock me to see them win fewer than 20 games. What I'd say, though, is Jordi Fernandez has a reputation as a developmental coach. He's got a reputation as a guy who can coach players and make them better than what they were before he got their hands on them, right? So I would presume that he will do that over the course of this season and next season. I would presume that the players would play hard for him. I think they will be competitive. Do I think they'll be good? No. I don't expect them to, pull a rabbit out of the hat and have some 500 season. I think the players will play hard and compete, but I don't expect them to be a good team or a quality team or a talent-rich team.
And for the fans that want to see them not be a good team because they want to see them get as many high picks as they can, they're going to root for that. However, Brian, I will say, if they are worse than some of those teams that you covered, you mentioned the 28-win team, you mentioned the 20-win team, this means that I'm going to have to check up on you more because, you got to check up on your beat reporter friends and make sure that they're okay because those are rough seasons. We got to let the people know. It's not easy. It's not easy covering those teams.
Those are long seasons.
Yeah.
And I understand why a good amount of the fan base would want them to just pick a side. Pick a lane and go with it. Yeah. Right? Go out and get an all-star, a legitimate all-star to pair with Mikal Bridges, whoever that is. Failing that, then pick a lane and rebuild, which they're choosing. That's what they're doing. What I would say is this. That's easier said than done if you are watching them on Yes than it is if you are paying for season tickets. If you are a season ticket holder and you are in that building on the reg, that's tough. That's a long season or long several seasons.
Yep.
So we'll see just how painful this gets before it gets better. I do think it will get better because I do think you've got one of the best drafts in recent memory coming up next year, and you'll have 4 first-round picks. one of which is assured of being a lottery pick. So I do think it will get better. I just think it'll get worse before it gets better.
And sometimes, as we know in sports, it has to go there. You got to hit rock bottom before you can start making your way back up to the top. That is Brian Lewis, Brooklyn Nets beat reporter for the New York Post, joining me here on New York Got Game. Brian, appreciate the time. I will check in on you, as always, through the summer, and hopefully the next season's not that bad. Hoping that for you. Thank you, man.
Thanks for having me.
All right, people, as I mentioned, NBA free agency officially gets underway on Sunday, June 30th. We hope that this episode helped you preview things with both the Knickerbockers and the Nets. Special thanks to my guests, Stefan, Bondy, and Brian Lewis, both of the New York Post. As always, thank you to the great folks who make this the best digital basketball show in NYC. For my director, Zach Tao, producer Lee Ensler, editor Jim Valver, I'm Dexter Henry. We got to bounce, but we'll see you next week on New York Got Game.
And thanks for watching New York Got Game. Boom shakalaka.